Good afternoon, Chief Ariyo, and thank you so much for granting us the opportunity to speak with you.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
All right, so let's get down to it. I mean, what delineation has been a major talking point in Delta State in the last few weeks. Lots of people have been talking about it. But let's get rudimentary. Let's get to the layman level. What exactly is ward delineation?
Thank you very much. Word delineation, simply put, if you look at the words, word is a political configuration. Delineation is divide. It's in simple language. So it is the recomposition by way of increasing, expanding, dividing the size of the ward. And a ward is a collection of registered voters, not population. In other words, you can have 1 million persons in a given territory and just 10,000 registered voters. For the purpose of delineation, it is that registered voters, the number of registered voters in a given locality. Now, the smallest block upon which this is built is the unit. There are several units that make up a ward, and several wards that make up a constituency, and several constituencies that make up a senatorial district, and several senatorial districts make up the country. That is the building block. So you start from the unit, down to the ward, down to the level of the constituency, the senatorial district. And so, for instance, if you are talking about Delta State, you are talking about 3 senatorial districts. If you are talking about Delta South Senatorial District, you are talking about 8 local government council areas. If you are talking about a local government council area, you are talking about several wards. These are pockets, division of voters. Just imagine that you have cartons of voters. For example, in Warri South and Warri Southwest and Warri North. Let's take Warri South as a typical example, because that's actually the boiling point. Okay? Under the law, there are supposed to be 10 wards. Now, due to gerrymandering, which we will explain later, there is what you call 12 wards. Now, and these wards are, you have Odi Shekiri ward, you have Okere ward, just like that. But the whole thing is a little bit more complicated because of the kind of system we practice, the federal system. So that the ward structure under a federal election is distinct and different from the ward structure under the state election, because the state election is governed by the law made by the State House of Assembly. For example, in Delta State, it's called DSEC law. But the federal law is the one that we call the Electoral Act. So, for instance, in Warri South, if it is under the state's electoral structure, it will be 19 wards. Okay, the same voters register. But if it's a federal election, it will be 10. It's supposed to be 10 wards. As we go on, I will explain to you. It's supposed to be 10 wards, but it is illegally 12 wards. So a ward is a carton, just to make it, for want of word, is a unit of collection of voters comprising of different electoral units. Are you getting the point?
So if we are to get it correctly, a ward is pretty much collection of the units.
Yes.
But it's largely for the voters.
Yes.
Registered voters.
Yes, it's on the basis of the registered voters.
That is also to say that if in a place you don't have lots of people who are registered voters, it doesn't count.
It doesn't count. And that's why recently what happened was that there was a policy of INEC that in order to manage the voters, once a unit has more than 700 voters, you spill over the excess and constitute another unit. Okay? Irrespective of the number of population there. You're not interested in the children, you're not interested in the adults, you're not interested in anybody, registered voters. And so, what drives the process of configuring this unit is the number of voters that are there. And the reason why you do continuous voting exercise is to enable you rearrange, rejiggle the units so that during the election you can manage it. It is very difficult to manage a unit with 1,400 voters. And so that unit will be split into two. 700 registered voters.
All right, so with that clearly stated now, let's move over and talk about the significance of this word delineation politically. What does it mean? How important is it in a political process?
You see, politics is about power dynamics. And the kind of political structure we have is the democratic structure where number counts. Not just numbers, number of voters. Because an election is won or lost on the basis of number of voters who vote for a particular candidate. No other one. It's not on the basis of the population that resides in a particular state or the one that resides in a particular ward. It is the matrix is the number of voters. Now, if you take Delta State for instance, you have 25 local government council areas. Now, each of these local government council areas is dominated by different ethnic groups. Okay? So that domination, because one of the fears by the founding father of this great country was that the minorities would be marginalized by the majority. That was the biggest problem. And that was the problem that made the colonial master to set up a commission to look into the fears of the minorities. Now, Delta State is a microcosm of Nigeria. You can take Delta State as a case study of Nigeria because you have different, unlike many other states. If you take Edo State for instance, you just have the Isham and the Benin. But here you have 5 distinct ethnic groups. So the more political units you are able to acquire for yourself, the stronger your access to political decision at the House of Assembly, at the House of Representatives, and at the Senate. I'll give you an example. A unit does not have any political representation, but a collection of units that make up a ward will have a councillor at the local government level. And the region to which that councillor belongs will then have a say in the sharing, the appropriation of the resources of the local government area. So, for instance, if you have 10 councillors, it means that you can have a stronger impact in decision making and appropriation of resources than those who have 5 councillors. And you need to control a ward to be able to produce a councillor. You get it? So, for instance, the whole genesis of this crisis was that in 1996.
No, we're yet to come to the crisis. We're talking about the political significance and importance of this.
Good. So, the political significance can be appreciated level to level. I have explained to you now that you will need a conglomeration of units to produce a councillor at a ward level. Then, you will need these wards to be able to produce a chairmanship candidate at the councillorship, at the local government council. Then you will need some portion for, you see, some local government councils have up to 2 members in the House of Assembly. Others don't. For example, Warri South has Warri South Constituency 1, Warri South Constituency 2. Uwe has 1. Okay? So, if you are able to control, if you take Warri South for instance, if you are able to control the number of wards in Warri South Constituency 1, it means that you have a chance of producing a member of the House of Assembly. Okay? And that is why the battle is on to be able to apportion more wards to yourself so that you determine who goes to the House of Assembly.
When you say apportion more words to yourself, doesn't that mean apportion more voters to yourself?
Not necessarily, because the voters are already fixed and there. And that's part of the problem in this whole thing. The voters are there. Okay? So, what the delineation is supposed to do is to use the voters as a basis of configuring,
of creating new good words,
and not population. Because population per se does not have any political significance in an election process. It's like if you have 10 million people in a country and only 2 million are eligible voters, the 8 million are a waste as far as that discussion is concerned. And that's why you find that across the globe, the percentage of those who determine the president of a country are the active voters. That's another stage, not just the voters. And that's why you complain about voters' apathy, because no matter the number of voters, it is only when they are active that they can make sense.
So let's get you clearly now.
Yes.
That as a result, the impact of voters
Yes.
from your locality, from
Yes.
your unit
Yes.
to your ward level
Yes.
has a direct impact
Yes.
on how politically relevant you are.
Absolutely. Okay. And you know that politics is about striving to allocate the maximum quantum of benefits and entitlements to your people.
All right, so having established that, very, very important, let's come down to Delta State and come back to the recent development. Nerves appear frayed. We have people on the edges, and all down to this ward delineation. Exactly why is this one generating lots of tension?
You see, the public seems to be oblivious of the fact that this problem has been there for a long time. It has been there for more than 22 years. Now, you see, a typical thing you will observe about population drift is that wherever you have a port, a seaport, people from other parts drift towards that seaport because traditionally, commerce. If you remove all the seaport from Lagos and the lagoon, Lagos will not be the Lagos that Lagos is. Do you agree with me?
I may have.
No. The reason why you agree with me is that one of the biggest commercial entitlement or benefits, or should I say, one of the biggest resources, commercial resources to Lagos is their seaport. Now, it is because importation is at its peak. If you can't get certain things in Lagos, you may not get it anywhere in Nigeria. It is not just because Lagos has seaport, but Lagos has active. In fact, Lagos is overburdened. Part of the traffic issues in Lagos is because of the ports. Now, you find that seaport is a magnet for commerce. Most of the goods and services, most of the goods that come, heavy duty goods that come from overseas, they come through the sea. Rewind to the time that the Warri port was very active. Warri was alive. And one of the things that a lot of researchers have been saying about bringing Warri back to life is to activate the seaport. Because once you activate the seaport, boom, commerce will rise. So you find that because Warri is a seaport city, a lot of the other people from different local governments area, they kind of gravitate towards Warri. Delta State has 25 local government council areas. And you even have the Shekiris in several other local government council areas. You don't have as much noise. In fact, you hardly call for an interview over issues in other parts. Now, In 1996, there was an attempt to do delineation. That was the first attempt to do delineation in recent times. When that attempt was made, the 10 wards that were in Warri, 8 of them were being fully controlled by the Ishekiri ethnic nationality, while 2 were being controlled by the Urhobo ethnic nationality, and none was being controlled by the Jaws. Now, the activity of 1997 led to the 12th ward. That's why you talk about the 10-12 ward. Before 1997, it was 10 wards. So when the...
What exactly happened in 1997? I mean, 1996, it was 10. 1997, it became 12. What exactly happened?
It was the delineation. This kind of activity took place. When it took place, it now reduced the number of wards for the Shekiris to 6. There are 8 wards were reduced to 6, while those of the Urhobos were increased by 4 to 6. It now became 12. Now, prior to this reduction, the Shekiris were able to produce 2 members of the House of Assembly. Are you getting the political significance now? Now, what was done by INEC then is what we call gerrymandering, because the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria stipulates the time within which to do delineation, just like population census. You don't do population census every day. You do it 10 years after 10 years. Also, delineation, you do it 10 years after 10 years. Now, the one that was done in 1997 was 4 years after the last one. You get it? Which was less than 10 years. So the Shekiris went to court to challenge it on the basis of the fact that it was inconsistent with the provisions of the Constitution. When the Shekiri got to court in 1997, they obtained an interlocutory injunction restraining INEC from using 12 wards to conduct election. I have a copy of that interlocutory injunction. I will make it available to you. Now, when they did that, INEC refused and went ahead to still use the 12th ward which they had configured as a result of delineation. Now, the case progressed till 2003, the year coincidentally I was called to the Nigerian bar. I wasn't a lawyer all this while. When in 2003, judgment was now delivered, and the judgment was that that particular exercise was illegal, null and void, and of no effect whatsoever. When that judgment was delivered, INEC again paused and still continued with the 12th ward structure. What it did was it appealed against the judgment, but there was no stay of execution. There was not even an application for stay of execution. So INEC continued using the illegal 12th ward. Of course, not without the overwhelming influence and inducement from stakeholders who were benefiting from the 12th ward regime. So INEC continued until 2018, when their appeal was struck out. When their appeal was struck out, demonstration started that they must execute the judgment, that is, implement the judgment. Now, INEC promised that they were going to do that in the next cycle of election. That was 2018. In essence, between 2003 till date, that judgment was never executed. Now, unknown to the Shekiris, INEC and the Jaws went to court. The Jaws took INEC to court. in a situation which we call in law a willing defendant battle. A willing defendant battle is you go to court with somebody and the person agrees, let us just go to court and do something. They went to court 18 years ago, unknown to the Shekiris. And there was none of the courts in which they disclosed to the court that there was an existing judgment. Okay? They went to court, it was the judge against INEC alone. Even the robots were not there. It was unknown to the robots. So they got to the Supreme Court and got a judgment. Supreme Court was also not aware that there was a judgment. So they fraudulently excluded both the Shekiris and the robots because they didn't want a situation where the Supreme Court will be informed that there is a judgment in respect of the same subject matter. So they now obtained a judgment in the Supreme Court. Because what they now told the Supreme Court was that it's more than 10 years since the last delineation exercise was done. They didn't tell the Supreme Court that there is a judgment which they themselves have not enforced. Now, the interesting thing, why I call it fraudulent, is that the only way known in the world that you can set aside a judgment is when you appeal that judgment, not when you start another case without the judgment creditor knowing. In other words, you rate the judgment creditor of the opportunity of being heard. So they got that judgment in 2022. Between 2003 and 2022, it's 19 years. Enough for INEC to have enforced that judgment, but INEC did not. So, having obtained a judgment in 2022, November, asking INEC to conduct a fresh delineation exercise, they now came and said they wanted to enforce this. We said we were not aware, but it's a Supreme Court decision. We are going to treat the fraudulent part of it later. Because when somebody hears there is a Supreme Court decision, there's a Court of Appeal decision, the person will say, I better take your Court of Appeal decision away. But that is the fraud in it. Because the only way it could have happened is when you appeal in that case. An appeal is the same case. An appeal is not another case.
When you say the Shekiris were not aware that the judge went to court, how is that possible?
Good.
I mean, legally, is it possible that a case involving one or two people or involving multiple parties goes to court and the other parties are not aware?
Yes, that's why I use the expression willing defendant. When the defendant, there's something that happens in Lagos that you should know. Sometimes a landlord wants to evict a tenant. He calls his friend to bear the name of that tenant in court. And they proceed. And that his friend fumbles until judgment is obtained. The tenant will be in his house eating when they will bring sheriff and all the rest to pack his property out. And if they say, what is happening? I didn't know. They'll say, here's the judgment. Do you understand what I'm saying? So, a willing defendant is a defendant that agrees that people should cooperate. You should not let the other person know. Do you think if the tenant had known, the tenant would have agreed? That fraud is what is making Lagos State government now trying to ensure that in tenancy matter, there is video coverage. Because in Nigeria today, the reason why Warri was able to escape what he escaped was there was really no official record. Anybody can be another James underneath Warri. You get the point? So that is how it is possible when you keep it quiet. The two of you agree to keep it quiet. You take dates. I will give you another example. Let me not give you this example because it is still within the ethnic discourse. So what then happened was that we said, okay, we are going to report that issue later to the Legal Practitioner Disciplinary Committee because the lawyers involved have breached their professional ethics by what they have done. But that will not address our issue now. Okay, you want to enforce the judgment. No problem. Let us go about the enforcement of the judgment. Before we knew what happened, I'm going to show you the photograph. Before we knew what happened, the INEC chairman invited the Jaws and the Robos to the national headquarters and established a committee to superintend the delineation exercise. He appointed the committee, inaugurated the committee, and empowered the committee to work unknown to the Shekiris, similar to what they did in the judgment. And I can show you the photographs, it's online.
But one would ask the question, where are the Shekiris? If you know that there is an issue like this, where are the Shekiris? This whole idea of unknown, it begs the question,
No,
how much of attention is were the Shekiris paying to that?
you see,
You have a critical case.
Yeah.
Shouldn't you be that
Yeah.
observant and following
Yeah.
trends?
you see, I always tell people that there's no security that can not be broken. People steal from the World Bank. A snitch has gone into the White House before. A thief can go into the White House. All you need to do is, if you have, who is organizing the inauguration and the appointment? Somebody who is willing to hide it. The chairman of a commission, even if he wants to hide it from his staff, he can do so. The MD of your organization can do certain things and you'll be surprised that you didn't know. Don't you think so? Is it not possible for your MD to do something against your interest if he wants to do it without your knowing? It is. Because you cannot be with your MD 247. What is extramarital relationships? There are relationships that are done in the secret until they come out in the out. So the point I'm making is that people don't know, even husbands and wives, they don't know what their partners are doing until maybe pregnancy results outside.
Doesn't that point to negligence? Once can be overlooked, twice. Doesn't that point to negligence on the part of the Ishekiri ethnic nationality in such a critical matter?
Well, I like that question. You see, the truth of the matter is that we are living in a democratic state. Okay? Now, I absolutely agree with you that we should have been more vigilant. But that is not an excuse for a normal setting. When I say normal setting, is that INEC is a product of the law. INEC has a scope and jurisdiction. INEC has a manual that requires it to act impartially. Indeed, if you look at INEC, the meaning of INEC, there is a word among INEC that suggests impartiality and neutrality. The first word there, independent. Independent. I agree with you on a moral ground that perhaps we should have been double, watchful. But don't forget that where you have the custodian of the treasury willing to let a thief come and steal from the treasury, it will be a Herculean task on your part to stop that theft. So as I was saying, they now went, did the inauguration. When we then found out, we now wrote to them and told them that as a major stakeholder in Warri Federal Constituency, do you think it accords with natural justice, equity, and good conscience for you to do such a significant exercise without us? I tell you, the chairman never replied to that letter. That letter was stamped by an INEC stamp. He never replied to that letter. Then, what he now did was to instruct his subordinate here, an inferior officer in Delta State, that's the REC, to invite us to participate in the subsequent phases of the exercise. Now, when we got there, we investigated and found out that the chairman of the committee, who reports to the chairman of INEC, and the field superintendent of the committee, who reports to the chairman of the committee, are persons of Ijaw ethnic extraction, leaders of thought in Ijaw. So we now objected. We now wrote. We even went to court to say it is a breach of the right of fair hearing for you to appoint somebody who has an interest in the outcome of a process to superintend it on two fronts. We referred them to their manual that prohibits a resident electoral officer from serving in his home state. Look at Guinea from Delta State. He never served in Delta State. Look at Yomiri. Yomiri is from Delta State. He never served in Delta State. So the procedure is to ensure that somebody who is likely, doesn't have to be really biased, somebody who is likely to be biased does not superintend an exercise. This exercise was superintended by Professor Rhoda Umans, a person of, not just an Ijaw, a member of the Ijaw Leaders of Thought. And the field superintendent was also an Ijaw person. So we objected to that. Nothing came out of it. We went to court to challenge them. Unfortunately, that was the time the Federal High Court in Warri was elevated to the Court of Appeal. So we couldn't really, there was no judge. In law, we say there was no court, because the court is the judge. So we had no option but to petition the presidency, petition the National Security Advisor. Nothing came out of it. Now, in law, any administrative body that is doing anything must ensure the observance of Section 36, subsection 1 of the Constitution. And that's what law is all about. There are two pillars that hold law. In Latin, we call the first one Nemo Judes in Casasua. That is, you can't be a judge in your own cause. The second pillar we call Audi Auterem Pater. You must listen to both sides. With all that I've narrated to you now, the first pillar was dislocated when INEC occasioned that meeting at which the committee was inaugurated, appointed, and empowered to conduct the exercise. They didn't listen. It was against the principle of Audi Auterem Pater. The second leg was dislocated when INEC now appointed persons who had interest, Nemo Judes in Casasua, who has interest in the outcome of the process. So at that stage, the two legs of justice were dislocated, and still they went on. They went on and on and on, determined. We went to court to challenge the exercise on the basis of the fact that, one, the judgment we had not been enforced. Before then, it is important, when we were in Asaba, we raised the point that, what about our judgment of 2003? And INEC agreed that they were going to implement the two pari passu. In other words, they were going to first of all restore the 10-ward structure before kicking off. I will also give that to you. I have the resolution signed by INEC on the letterhead of INEC, signed by INEC, signed by all the stakeholders. But as we went on, they completely jettisoned. They didn't do that. So we went to court. When we got to court, three issues arose. The first one was whether our going to court amounted to abuse of court process. The second one was that what we call in law stare decisis. Stare decisis is the principle that when there are two cases on the same subject matter with the same parties and similar circumstances, this one of the superior court will prevail. Then the third one was what you call Public Officers Protection Act. When a public officer does you something that is wrong, you have to bring the action within 3 months from the date of the wrong. So the first issue about abuse of court process was determined in our favor. The second issue was determined in favor of INEC, because INEC was the one that brought the personal objection. And the third issue was also determined in favor of INEC. So it was 1 for us, 2 for INEC. The case was dismissed. So we appealed. Because, 1, we believe that POPA does not touch on fundamental rights. There is no time limit for bringing fundamental rights. Once your fundamental right has been breached, you can bring it at any time. Secondly, there is a limitation on POPA. POPA, which is the Public Officers Protection Act, is not an umbrella for somebody who is doing illegality, especially somebody who is disobeying the law. So, because we knew and smelled the atmosphere in the court that they were going to somehow rule against us, we prepared our appeal and brought to court. That same day, we appealed and set the appeal on them. Now, records were transmitted. When they wanted to call this 4th of April meeting, we filed an application for injunction restraining them from holding the meeting. That application was served on INEC on the 2nd of April and served on the other parties as well on the 2nd of April. The law is that when you are in the Court of Appeal and you have served an application for injunction restraining the doing of an act, and it has been served on the person ought not to proceed, because it will render the situation, it will force his state of fiat accompli on the court. Fiat accompli is helplessness. What I'm trying to stop you, what the court has to sit down to decide whether they stop you from doing, you have already done. So we now followed up with another application for the courts, because the courts, the authorities are that where a person does that, you can set aside that, you can annul that which he has done, because the court will not allow anybody to force a state of helplessness on it. Now, they went on, and all the demonstrations and what have you went on. Our demand now became that, 1, that the federal government should set up a panel of inquiry into this entire exercise and determine, 1, whether INEC observed the principle of natural justice in the course of the entire exercise. 2, that we suspect that there was inducement, financial inducement, that the key INEC staff that were involved in this exercise, the government should investigate their accounts, because it's a strong suspicion that INEC, especially as some of the people involved are professors, they should know their left from their right. It's a strong suspicion that there was inducement, so their accounts should be examined. 3rd, we are saying that they should be investigated to determine why they refused to enforce a judgment that was delivered way back in 2003. And as a matter of fact, an injunction that was granted in 1997. Then, 3, we want the federal government to stay proceedings in this activity pending the outcome of this investigation. Now, the point is that I've explained that the driver of this whole thing is for people to control more power at the House of Assembly, the National Assembly, and even the Senate. And it is interesting to note that the shekiris are also spread along over local government. For example, the shekiris are in nowhere. Bolokoso is there. There are some other towns there. You would not, in the whole of the country, 775 local government councils there, it is only Warri that is isolated for delineation. And yet, the last delineation exercise was done everywhere. Delineation exercise is supposed to be a national thing. It's like saying that you want to isolate Warri for population census. You provide opportunity for those people who are strangers in Warri to bring their brothers and sisters from elsewhere to compound the situation here. So, to let you know that, like, people are agitating for creation of states because they want more resource control. If you take note, you see that the number of states that was proposed recently was alarming, very, very alarming. Now, if you go to Lagos State, it's the same principle of wanting to control more, because the attitude is to want to grab and grab and grab. Lagos State, for instance, the president has submitted a bill to validate the excess local government council areas in Lagos State. Why? Because they want more resources. So it will now mean that Lagos State will occupy a special status, because creation of local government is supposed to be a national exercise. You don't isolate a state and create, because the resources for the local government is coming from the national. Okay, so these are the forms of marginalization. Marginalization can come either because the marginalizer, in quotes, is in power or has more population. If you look at it, for instance, all the ethnic nationality we are talking about, although we are in a minority region, but they are relative majority in the states and in the region. The Jaws, for instance, they control Bayelsa State, they partly control River State, they are in Edo State, they are in Ondo State, and there are lots in Delta State. You have Bomadi, Burutu, and Patani. Okay, so you have a counter force that is strong enough, both human resources and material resources, to frustrate the situation that we have. Then if you take the Urhobos, they control the whole of Delta South Senatorial District and then some other areas. And so it's a pathetic situation, because we find ourselves in the midst of people who see where we are as a prime location, which everybody wants to clamp into.
And then lastly, I want to ask you, so INEC has responded by saying there is no conclusion, they've not finalized. So what is just simply put forward was a proposal. What's your response to that?
I think that is rubbish, because, you see, I'm aware of the entire process. The Urhobos submitted a proposal, the Shekiri submitted a proposal, the Ijaw submitted a proposal. What INEC came up with was the Ijaw proposal. And that's why you can see that even the Urhobos have come out to speak against. I'm sure you are aware.
It's in the public space.
Good, it's in the public space. So you find that and that is part of the malpractice, the rigging we are talking about.
How do you know that is the job proposal?
Good, because I know my proposal. I know the Shekiri proposal. I know the Urhobo proposal, and I know the job proposal.
How did you get the Ijana? I mean, isn't that supposed to be property of INEC, or was it shared across the board?
No, you see, there was a stakeholders meeting where each of these ethnic nationalities were supposed to submit their proposal. So we were fully aware. And what is even more was that there were utterances that amounted to boast about what would happen. You see, I don't want to insinuate anything, but you see, the Niger Delta region, Warri area today, as it stands, has a very big issue, and that is the issue of over-financing private individuals through government patronage. And that is telling and is going to tell on what will happen in the next few years. Because when wealth goes into the hands of private actors who do not have the psychological maturity to manage it, a lot of things will happen. Some people may not even know, may not understand what is happening now, but I look at them and laugh. That they perhaps are keeping a small snake in their pocket and saying that it is a small snake. But in no time, they will understand that a snake is a snake.
I want to say thank you so much, Brother Robinson Ariyo, for giving us the opportunity to understand all of this from your own lens, and it's been very, very revealing from our own end, and I hope that our audience have a clearer picture as to regarding what is happening from your perspective. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Always a pleasure to have you, Tracy.
Atlantic TV, culturally inclined and uniquely different.